Hello everyone, the Coconut Story, where we give you stories that will leave you wanting more. Today we will have a collection of famous stories from Reddit, so sit back, relax, have some snacks, and enjoy. What if everything you've ever known, everything you thought was real, suddenly vanished, like a dream slipping away at the moment you wake up? Imagine waking up one day, only to find that the life you thought you had never existed at all. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? But for me, it became my reality. This is the story of how one moment, just one split-second moment, changed everything. This is the famous Reddit story known as Awoken by a Lamp.
My last semester at a certain college, I was assaulted by a football player for walking where he was trying to drive. Note, he was 325 pounds, and I was 120. The impact knocked me unconscious. While unconscious on the ground, I lived a different life. I met a wonderful young lady who made my heart skip and my face turn red. I pursued her for months and had to deal with a few jerk boyfriends before finally winning her over. After 2 years, we got married, and almost immediately, she bore me a daughter. I had a great job, and my wife didn't have to work outside the house. When my daughter was 2, my wife bore me a son. My son was the joy of my life. Every morning before I left for work, I would walk into his room to check on him and dote on both him and my daughter. One day, while sitting on the couch, I noticed that the perspective of the lamp in the room was odd, like inverted. It was still in 3D, but just wrong. It was a square lamp base, red with gold trim on 4 legs and a white square shade. I was transfixed, couldn't look away. I stayed up all night staring at it. The next morning, I didn't go to work. Something was just not right about that lamp. I stopped eating. At first, I only left the couch to use the bathroom, but soon, I stopped that too, as I wasn't eating or drinking. I stared at that lamp for 3 days before my wife became really worried. She had someone come and try to talk to me. By this point, my cognizance was breaking down and my wife was freaking out. She took the kids to her mother's house just before I had my epiphany. The lamp was not real. The house was not real. My wife, my kids, none of it was real. The last 10 years of my life were not real. The lamp began to grow wider and deeper. Its dimensions remained inverted. It consumed my entire perspective until all I could see was red. I heard voices, screams, and all kinds of strange noises. Then I became aware of pain, a lot of pain. The first words I spoke were, "I'm missing teeth." I opened my eyes. I was lying on my back on the sidewalk, surrounded by people I didn't know. Many were freaking out. I was completely confused. At some point, a cop scooped me up, dragged/walked me across the sidewalk and grass, and threw me face down in the back of a cop car. I was still dazed and confused. The cop took me to the hospital. Apparently, he didn't want to wait for the ambulance to arrive. There, I underwent CT scans and other tests. What followed were 3 years of horrid depression. I grieved the loss of my wife and children, all while grappling with the knowledge that they never actually existed. I feared I was losing my mind. Night after night, I cried myself to sleep, desperately hoping to see her in my dreams. But I never have. Sometimes, though, I catch glimpses of my son. Out of the corner of my eye, I see him, always 5 years old. But I can never hear what he's trying to say.
This story changed me forever. It forced me to question reality and the boundaries of the human mind. Was it a dream, a hallucination, or something we don't yet understand? I may never know the answer. If you've ever experienced something similar, know that you're not alone. Share your story in the comments below. Let's explore these mysteries together. What if a simple road trip, a routine drive across the country, turned into something you couldn't explain? Imagine taking a detour through a town that feels familiar, too familiar, where strangers greet you like old friends, calling you by name, knowing details about your life you never shared. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? But for my brother and me, it was all too real. This is the story of how one unplanned stop, just one small decision, led us to a place we've never been able to find again. This is the famous Reddit story known as Ruby Tuesdays, New Mexico.
In the winter of 2009, my brother and I took a road trip from Portland, Oregon to Port St. Lucie, Florida, and back again. We made the trip to visit my sister who lives in Port St. Lucie. She and her husband just had their first child, and my brother and I were excited to see the newborn. On the trip to Port St. Lucie, we took a combination of freeways from the northwest all the way down to the southeast corner, basically a diagonal route. But several times throughout our voyage we were tremendously delayed by snow. The trip, which should have taken no more than 3 days, ended up taking 5. Because of this delay, we had to cut short our visit with our sister's family. On the trip back to Portland, we decided to take I-10 the entire way. This stretch of freeway runs all the way from Florida to Los Angeles and would completely keep us away from the snow. The I-10 route added several hundred miles, but we both needed to be home for work the following Monday, and this was a surefire way not to be delayed. The first day of the return trip was uneventful, but we did manage to drive 1,300 miles from Port St. Lucie to San Antonio before stopping for the night. The plan was to make it all the way to Las Vegas the next night, which would leave us with about a 14-hour final day drive. The trip was going well. It wasn't until we left San Antonio that the glitches started happening. The car we took on this trip was a 2008 Honda Civic Hybrid. The entire trip we had been getting right around 35 miles per gallon. This is digitally displayed on the dash, so we had become very aware of how many miles we could squeeze out of a tank. We knew to refuel around 350 miles, but we also knew we could stretch that number into the low 400s if need be. About 100 miles outside San Antonio, I noticed the fuel gauge was dropping noticeably faster than usual, so I clicked the button to change the dashboard display only to see the car was getting barely 26 miles per gallon. At first I was shocked, but I reasoned it to possibly driving uphill the entire way. I still don't know? I thought throughout the course of an entire tank of fuel that it would eventually balance itself out and we would finish the tank within that 35 miles per gallon range. I was wrong. I kept a very detailed log of this entire trip, and this one stop in Fort Stockton, Texas is the only anomaly in the entire book. The car, which had consistently held around 35 miles per gallon, suddenly finished an entire tank off at 25.8 miles per gallon. That is over 100-mile difference in the vehicle's normal range. I still to this day cannot figure out why there was such a drastic shift in fuel consumption in that 300-mile stretch from San Antonio. I've reflected on that tank of gas several times since this happened, and I have almost come to the conclusion that it was an intentional glitch in order to make us pull over where we did. Our original plan was to refuel about 50 miles later in a town that I cannot remember, but we obviously ran short on fuel. Anyway, with our GPS program to Las Vegas, Nevada, we headed back onto the road in which the GPS directed. Pretty soon after we got back on the road, we realized we were no longer on I-10 heading west. Instead, we were north on Highway 285. Here's a TIL for some people. Evenly numbered highways and freeways are heading east/west while odds are north/south. We didn't think much about being off the interstate because many times throughout the drive we had been directed onto bypass highways. We assumed this was just another such instance. After about an hour and a half of driving on Highway 285, we crossed into New Mexico, which was about 2 hours earlier than we should have crossed the border. By this time we realized the GPS thought this was a more efficient way to go to Vegas, even though by all accounts it is about an hour faster if we had stayed on the 10. We were annoyed, but decided to just stick it out with the GPS and keep heading north through New Mexico. Nearly 5 hours after refueling in Fort Stockton, my brother and I were hungry and decided it was time to find somewhere to eat. Driving through this part New Mexico is kind of lonely. There are very few towns, and where there are towns, they are small and on the verge of becoming ghosts. I think their economies are built around helping travelers fill up their gas tanks. Other than that, I cannot see a reason for them to exist. My brother and I have talked about what happened next so many times, but we still cannot figure it all out. We passed through a small town with a couple gas stations, and we know the town was named Vaughn, New Mexico, and then about 20 miles later we drove through a town called Encino, New Mexico, which did not have a gas station, that we can recall. In fact, the second town didn't really seem to have much there, if anything. I wasn't sure if anyone was living there. I seem to remember questioning why it existed in the first place, but then quickly dismissing it and driving right through. Not even 10 miles after passing through Encino, New Mexico, we surprisingly came upon a city/town that wasn't loaded in the GPS. This wasn't a big deal, because I was using a cheap handheld that lost its signal all the time, but usually the only things it didn't display were newly built roads and recent construction areas. This city was definitely not brand new, so I figured the GPS was being buggy. The oddest part of finding this city, neither of us remembers seeing any warning we were coming up on a town of this size. It had several fast food joints, restaurants, hotels, motels, grocery store, Albertsons maybe, and even some bars. If I were to guess, I would say this city was roughly 10 to 20k people. We decided to pull off and grab a bite to eat. Normally we probably would have grabbed some fast food, but my brother saw a Ruby Tuesdays and really wanted to try it out. There were a couple Ruby Tuesdays around the Portland area at the time, but neither of us had been there. We had just heard they had a pretty good salad bar, and I guess my brother was in the mood for something other than fast food. I went along with the suggestion because I was sick of eating junk food. For the rest of this story, I will be N and my brother will be G. We pulled into the Ruby Tuesdays parking lot, got out of the car and walked in the restaurant. Immediately upon entering, a waitress who was milling around the hostess station says, "Oh my word, is that N and G?" Both my brother and I answered that it was indeed us, and the waitress went on to ask how life was in Portland. Suddenly it clicked, this girl knows who we are, but we are over 1,000 miles from home. Did we know her from back home? My brother and I both gave very basic vague answers to her question, and I could tell she was kind of unsettled that my brother and I were being evasive. When we were seated, my brother immediately asked me where we knew her from, which was the same question I was going to ask him. I told him that I had no idea who she was, and that she obviously had mistaken us with some other people. Not more than a minute later this guy bartender comes up and says, "No fucking way, G and N. You back for jobs?" What? My brother went on to tell the guy they had us mistaken with some other people. He laughed and dismissed my brother's response as a joke. The bartender continued on seamlessly and started asking us how we fared in the 3-month anatomy and physiology course we had taken at Oregon State. I remember thinking all of a sudden, this is not a coincidence anymore. My brother and I had taken a 3-month 15-credit A&P class at Portland State University when we were in our early 20s. We were late 20s when this interaction happened. Finally, I asked the guy exactly where they knew us from, and he just kind of paused and started looking me over. Then he said, "Oh damn, you guys just look really similar to some people that used to work here." He apologized and claimed he had to get back to work. After a bit, our food came and my brother and I noticed they had switched out our waitresses from the girl who recognized us when we walked in. That wasn't a big deal, although a bit strange. Next, a guy who I can only guess was the manager starts walking over to our table with a big smile on his face. As he gets within about 10 feet of us, he kind of starts looking over my head and stops. I think someone behind me was directing him not to talk to us. After he received the message, he sharply turned 90 degrees and walked away without saying a word. This had quickly become the most awkward meal of our lives. It went from people acting like it was a celebration for us to have shown up to everyone avoiding eye contact with us at all cost. After we finished up with our meals, the waitress told us the cash registers were frozen and that our meal was on the house. I really wanted to ask the waitress what the name of the city was that we were in, but I also really wanted to get out of there. After leaving the restaurant, we were running pretty low on gas, so I decided to refuel before we got back on the highway. I assumed the name of the city would be printed on the receipt. We were not that lucky. This city strip was a one-way road on the eastern side of the highway. When we left Ruby Tuesdays, the only way to turn was right, and it headed straight back to northbound 285. In order to refuel, I would have to head north on the one-way street and turn right on a side street to head back to the southern part of town to the gas station. The only available right-hand turn off that one-way street was closed, so I was forced back onto the highway without fueling up. About 20 minutes later, we found a truck stop at the intersection of 285 and I-40 where we finally filled up. The rest of the trip was very ordinary. We talked at length about how weird that Ruby Tuesdays was in the middle of New Mexico. We came up with solutions about how we had doppelgangers with the same names. We joked about how people that look similar follow the exact same paths in life regardless of their upbringing. We talked ourselves into it being a major coincidence. When we finally got back to Portland, we decided to do a little research and find out the name of this town. Here is the Google Maps picture of that stretch of highway. We know we refueled at a truck stop at the intersection of 285 and I-40, which means that we had to have passed through Vaughn and Encino, so there should be a city between the truck stop and Encino. I don't see anywhere on the regular map or the satellite map where this little city could possibly be. We have never really been able to answer what happened that day. I can still vividly remember the waitress's face of unease by the way my brother and I were behaving, the bartender's voice change when he figured out we were not the people he thought we were, and thinking the manager looked identical to the actor Ken Moreno. My brother and I know this stuff happened, but we have never been able to find the solution. Maybe some Redditors can give me an answer, or maybe this was just a glitch. Maybe someone has driven that stretch of road and knows the town. TLDR, apparently my brother and I worked at a Ruby Tuesdays in the middle of New Mexico.
This story left me in shock. It challenged everything I thought I knew about reality and made me question how much of our world we truly understand. Was it chance, a glitch, or something beyond explanation? We may never have the answer. If you've ever encountered something you couldn't explain like this, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments below.
What if the safe, ordinary world you thought you lived in suddenly turned into a waking nightmare? One moment, you're a child, running errands with a pocket full of change. The next, a stranger steps into your life, a stranger who refuses to leave. This is the story of how a man known only as Dr. Ramsey turned my childhood into a battleground of fear, testing the strength of a family determined to protect their own. What happened changed me forever, and it might leave you questioning how safe we ever really are. This is the famous Reddit story known as Dr. Ramsey.
A week or so before my 10th birthday, I walked to the corner store with a $5 bill and picked up a jar of ragu for my mom. On my way home, a man I'd never seen before fell in step with me and began talking. "Hi," he said, cheerfully. "My name is Dr. Ramsey. I'm a pediatrician. Do you know what a pediatrician is?" I walked along silently, not replying and fervently hoping he would take that as a sign he should leave me alone. Subtleties were not his strong suit, though, because he kept right on chattering. "Are your parents looking for a pediatrician for you? Of course, you're almost a big girl now, you'll be needing another kind of doctor soon, won't you? That's okay, though. They can still bring you to me until then. What's your name? You have beautiful hair." I was just on my way to get some suckers for the candy jar in my office. "Do you like suckers?" Thankfully, we were nearing my house, so I ran forward, up the back steps and into through the kitchen door. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a very long, very scary ordeal. It didn't take long after that for Dr. Ramsey to begin showing up. At first, it seemed benign enough, at least to a kid. He would drive by nearly every day, smiling and waving. I told my mom, who said maybe it was on his way home from work. But then, the phone calls began. My dad called me into the living room and sat me down. He asked about the day Dr. Ramsey followed me home, and if I talked to him. He said I wasn't in trouble, but that I needed to tell him the truth. I told him no, and he asked if I was sure, could I be forgetting something? I told him no again, and he frowned, then asked, "Then how does he know your name?" I didn't know. It turns out, that was not all he knew. He knew my sister's name as well. Pretty soon, neither my sister or I were allowed to answer the phone. He called several times a day. At first, neither of us knew what he was saying. Then, one night, one of my brothers told us that he was telling my parents that he was going to hurt me, and later, my sister. Things got complicated after that. My dad had called the police, but as this was before there were any stalking laws, there was not a lot they could do. They told my parents to call back if he tried anything. My dad then called a friend of his from back in the day, who happened to be a cop. For the next month, my dad's friend escorted me to and from school. Suddenly, life as I knew it came screeching to a halt. I couldn't walk to school alone, I couldn't play outside, I couldn't walk to Super America, sort of like a 7-Eleven for those who don't know. When access to me was completely denied, things escalated. It was around this time he began threatening my sister as well. Then one afternoon my sister, two of my brothers, my mom and I were in the kitchen. One of my brothers saw a glimpse of someone in the garage, they'd seen him too. Dr. Ramsey came bolting out of the garage, my brothers chasing after him. They ran all the way to Cherokee Park, where he lost them in the trees. My parents called the police again, but nothing came of it. The only information they had was a description and a name that was almost certainly fake. A couple weeks later, we woke to find our dog hanging from the side porch. She was a gorgeous saddleback German Shepherd, born the same day I was. We were all devastated. The cops said there was no evidence it was him, and ruled it accidental, but none of us believed that. His phone calls became more informative in the meantime. He would talk about who was home, and who wasn't. If my brother would say my dad was home, he would tell him who was really in the house. He also would talk about the house itself, about the window in the kitchen he could easily open with a knife from the outside even when it was locked, and about the French doors that connected the living room to the side porch and how the lock could be finagled from the outside if you jiggled it just right. That night, my dad put in some carpenter nails at the bottom of the French doors until he could get a new lock ordered. My parents had to go to a company event for my dad's work. My older brothers were at Saints West roller skating rink. My sister was on the phone with her best friend. My little brother was on the floor asleep. I was watching Devo on the midnight special with Wolfman Jack. It was late. Suddenly, the top of the French doors swung inward, and in the few milliseconds before the nails in the bottom caused them to snap back, I could see his silhouette. My sister whipped the phone at the television, and we ran up the stairs. About halfway up, we realized our little brother was still asleep on the living room floor. As quietly as we could, we slipped back down the stairs to get him. We all went into our bedroom and didn't turn on the light, this way we could see outside. We watched out the window for a while, and when we didn't find him, we crept down the hall to our brother's room to look. We looked down and could see someone standing at the back door. He knocked, loudly. "What do you want?" my sister asked out the window. He stepped back and said, "Is this the Mercy residence? I have a pizza for delivery. Can you come to the door?" She scoffed at him, declaring she was not stupid, she could see he didn't have a pizza, and she was calling the cops. He left. A short while later, my brothers returned home. We told them what happened and they walked around the yard, watching for him. They came back in, and things settled down. By now we'd pretty much given up calling the cops because it never helped, so we just went back in, each of us, except my youngest brother, still asleep, carrying a knife from the kitchen, just in case. Eventually, one of my brothers went into the kitchen to get a bowl of cereal as a snack. You know that sensation you get when you can just feel someone watching you?
Yeah.
He had that in spades. He kept looking around the kitchen, through the doorway into the dining room, at the windows. He didn't see anything, but he could still feel eyes on him, so he went closer to the door to try to see better. The kitchen lights were reflecting on the windows of the door, it had 3 rows of 3 windows, so he still couldn't see. He stepped closer, then closer again, until he was right up to the door, then cupped his hands on either side of his head so he could see. There on the other side of the window pane was Dr. Ramsey, smiling back at him. He turned to yell for my older brothers, and when he looked back again, he was gone. They went out again to look for him, but didn't see him. The next night we were at the table playing Crazy Eights, and my brother was restless. My sister asked him what's wrong, and he said he always felt like any minute now there would be a boom 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 on a door or window. Almost immediately after he finished his sentence, boom 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 on the window right behind him. In the chaos, the two eldest ran out, but he was already gone. A couple of weeks later, I was at school and we were outside on the playground during recess. I was swinging upside down when I saw that now familiar blue Ford Galaxy cruising by, moving slowly. There he was, smiling and waving. He called my name, and I ran to the teacher and told her. The school had been told all about him, and she took me inside right away and called my mom. That same day my mom had gotten a call from the school office asking her to verify that my dad was picking me up, as he'd called to say he was on his way. He wasn't. Not long after that, I woke up one night, thirsty. I went down to the kitchen for a drink and there, sitting alone in the dark, was my dad. On the table, a weapon. He was tired of the police waiting until Dr. Ramsey tried something, he was tired of his children being terrorized, he was tired of being afraid every time he left for work that something would happen to us while he was gone. I sat with him for a time, watching, before he sent me back to bed. These events, and many more, took place over a period of around 18 months. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. He had vanished from our lives, the phone calls, the drive-by with the creepy waves, everything. For a long time, during and after the Dr. Ramsey days, I would have a recurring nightmare in which I would wake up to find him standing over me as I slept. It took a long time before I felt like a kid again. Found out years later that when he was calling, Dr. Ramsey would tell my parents that he was going to grape and bill me, and later my sister, and that there was nothing they could do about it. I don't know what happened to him when he disappeared. I don't know if he was in a car wreck, locked in prison, in a coma, but sometimes I wonder if the wait ended for my dad when he was sitting in the darkened kitchen one night. I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. Update: I am working on bringing this story to a book format, a memoir of sorts. I am doing it partly because writing about it has proven to be cathartic for me, and partly because I want to help others see that this is survivable. I have started a GoFundMe for it because in order to write it completely, I need to be able to house my daughter and I while I'm in progress, and also because I'd like to be able to get my hands on the most information/records possible so that it is as full and accurate a book as it can be. I spent time over the winter in Minnesota, interviewing family so I could fill in the gaps of my own memory. I even, finally, asked my dad if he knew what happened to Dr. Ramsey in the end.
This story isn't just a memory, it's a scar. Dr. Ramsey took away the innocence of my childhood, but he also showed me the strength and resilience of my family. To this day, I don't know what became of him or why he disappeared so suddenly. Maybe justice caught up to him. Maybe my father did. If you've ever faced something that left you questioning your safety or the world around you, know you're not alone. Share your story in the comments, and let's keep this conversation alive. Together, we can shine a light on the shadows. You can find the link for the GoFundMe in the description below. What starts as a group of friends looking for a thrill in the quiet countryside of North Wales quickly spirals into something far more sinister. It began with a manhole cover, a sense of adventure, and a hidden passage inside a cement bridge. But what we found deep within those narrow walls wasn't just unexpected, it was deeply unsettling, the kind of discovery that sticks with you even years later. This is a story of curiosity, unease, and the haunting traces of someone else's darkness. This is the famous Reddit story known as The Bridge.
This was going to be short, but the memory sprung into my mind a couple days back and I thought it would be worth sharing. I live in North Wales, UK. For anyone who has had the pleasure of visiting, it truly is a beautiful place to live, though, for an adolescent boy, it is certainly lacking in things to do. As a result, my friends and I would often find ourselves mindlessly exploring areas of the countryside and coastline. Despite it being quite sparsely populated, in comparison to the closest cities, there is a dual carriageway running right along the coast from Wales into England. Also, train tracks run alongside this road for most of its course, occasionally passing overhead via a small cement bridge. Anyway, there was one night a few years ago, when about 4 of us randomly decided to try and explore the inside of one of these bridges, as one of the group had observed a manhole cover nearby which we believed to be the entrance. On closer inspection, we discovered that several tools would be required in order to gain entry. We returned with the necessary equipment and proceeded to unbolt the cover. This had to be done stealthily as the train track was right beside us, not close enough to be of any danger, but definitely a sufficiently small distance to cause panic for any train driver. And panic usually means police. It wasn't long before we had removed the heavy steel disc, and had started descending the ladder down into the structure. Once we had all safely reached the bottom, we decided to progress to the other side. At this point, we are totally confined into the narrow space that leads into the main area. If you are confused as to what the hell this bridge is supposed to be, you probably should be, because it was rather peculiar. I mean, I would have never known there was even an inside had we not found the manhole. So, as we squeeze and crouch, and at one point scrape along our bellies, to the other side of the structure there is a growing sense of claustrophobia between us. The distance from end to the other is surprisingly long, but by the halfway point you can look down through narrow gaps onto the motorway below. This was actually pretty cool, which helped keep us calm, in a strange way. At this point, apart from the mild discomfort and confinement, we were still just a group of guys on an adventure. This was about to change dramatically. No more than a few meters beyond halfway, which we could tell due to the symmetry of the passageways through the bridge, one of us claimed they could see some object in the distance at the far end. Slightly hesitantly, we agreed to investigate. Bad move. I reached the end first, and let me tell you, I have never felt the same sense of dread before or since. In front of me was a single fold-away chair positioned facing a wall. On the wall was a partially torn page from a newspaper, or a magazine, showing a fully naked lady in an erotic position. The reason I don't just refer to it as porn is because something was different about it. I can't put my finger on it, but it seemed more sinister than sexy, if that makes any sense. More disturbingly, the eyes of the woman on display had been cut from the page. Removed with precision, not just hastily ripped off. The scene that lay before us had rendered us completely speechless, and an overpowering sense of panic could be felt collectively. That was when we found the condom. The horrendous, gut-wrenching, blood-drenched condom. Needless to say, we got the fuck out of there as fast as humanly possible, smashing our knees and shins against the sharp cement edges that lined the path to the ladder by which we had entered. Of course, we were all praying to God that the manhole hadn't been resealed, as it was impossible to tell until you reached the ladder itself. Thankfully, the exit route was clear, and we promptly dashed as far away as our legs could carry us. I'm sure this ending comes as a disappointment to some of you reading this, as we, luckily, never bumped into the twisted individual who sits in that chair, but I must stress how radically out of the norm this was given where I live. The reason I mentioned the population earlier was with purpose. There is easily enough people here to escape the realms of crazy country folk, yet nowhere near enough people to have someone clearly lose grip on society without somebody taking notice. For example, there was literally only one homeless man, who everyone in the area knew and grew fond of, eventually resulting in a mass gathering at his funeral when he passed away. I sometimes think, though not recently as I had more or less forgotten about that night entirely, about the person who climbs down into that bridge and navigates through the darkness to sit facing a wall, and do God knows what, that ends up with a condom full of blood. You honestly couldn't envision a more surreal situation. It has just come to my realization that what we unearthed that night has not once been uttered to another soul. As a naive teenager, it was the type of thing you just wanted to forget, but thinking about, we probably should have let the police, or at least someone, know about what was down there, because it wasn't the doings of a healthy-minded individual. So, there you have it. Apologies for the length. I got a little carried away as it is my first LNM post and I wanted to make the reading experience as similar to the reality as I could. Now I'm a few years older, and hopefully a bit braver, I'm considering going down there again, accompanied of course, to see what fucked up shit might be waiting. This could well happen in the next couple days, and rest assured I will 100% post an update as I currently have no job, so time is plentiful. Edit, as promised, here are the photos from the return visit. We went early evening, so there was still plenty of light, and as a result I have decided to use a simple filter on most of the outdoor shots, simply to reduce the light and give it the eeriness it deserves. I had forgotten that the passageways don't actually run all their way through the structure. It is sealed off at the midway point, so the slight dip above the supporting pillar is where the sinisterness took place. This makes me wonder, is there anything untoward on the other side? If you look closely, my friend's left hand can be seen gripping a rung, the rest of him disappearing into the darkness. When you are staring down this passageway, it is virtually complete darkness. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. To give you an idea of the size, you would definitely have to squeeze through this on your stomach. It wouldn't be a super tight squeeze, but it wouldn't be possible to crouch. Also, the slightly raised surface you can see just through this hole is an indicator of what the rest of the passageway leading to the dip looks like: random raised surfaces and narrow gaps, making it impossible to stand up.
Asterisk sometimes, the most unexpected adventures reveal things you're not prepared to face. What we found inside that bridge wasn't just strange, it was disturbing in a way that lingered, a chilling reminder that even the quietest corners of the world can hide their share of darkness. Looking back, I wonder who, or what, left those unsettling traces behind, and if they're still out there, somewhere. Have you ever stumbled upon something that sent a shiver down your spine? Share your story in the comments. Life has a way of humbling us when we least expect it. For me, it took a string of frustrating roadside mishaps, a brush with indifference, and an act of pure kindness from total strangers to remind me what it means to truly be human. This story isn't just about hitchhiking, car trouble, or even the incredible people who stopped to help me. It's about the simple, universal truth that we all rely on one another, whether we realize it or not. This is the Reddit story known as Today You, Tomorrow Me.
Just about every time I see someone I stop. I kind of got out of the habit in the last couple of years, moved to a big city and all that. My girlfriend wasn't too stoked on the practice. Then some shit happened to me that changed me and I am back to offering rides habitually. If you would indulge me, it is a long story and has almost nothing to do with hitchhiking other than happening on a road. This past year I have had 3 instances of car trouble. A blow out on a freeway, a bunch of blown fuses and an out-of-gas situation. All of them were while driving other people's cars, which, for some reason, makes it worse on an emotional level. It makes it worse on a practical level as well, what with the fact that I carry things like a jack and extra fuses in my car, and know enough not to park, facing downhill, on a steep incline with less than a gallon of fuel. Anyway, each of these times this shit happened I was disgusted with how people would not bother to help me. I spent hours on the side of the freeway waiting, watching roadside assistance vehicles blow past me, for AAA to show. The 4 gas stations I asked for a gas can had told me that they couldn't loan them out for my safety, but I could buy a really shitty 1-gallon one with no cap for $15. It was enough, each time, to make you say shit like, "This country is going to hell in a handbasket." But you know who came to my rescue all 3 times? Immigrants. Mexican immigrants. None of them spoke a lick of the language. But one of those dudes had a profound effect on me. He was the guy that stopped to help me with a blowout with his whole family of 6 in tow. I was on the side of the road for close to 4 hours. Big Jeep, blown rear tire, had a spare but no jack. I had signs in the windows of the car, big signs that said need a jack and offered money. No dice. Right as I am about to give up and just hitch out there, a van pulls over and dude bounds out. He sizes the situation up and calls for his youngest daughter who speaks English. He conveys through her that he has a jack but it is too small for the Jeep, so we will need to brace it. He produces a saw from the van and cuts a log out of a downed tree on the side of the road. We rolled it over, put his jack on top, and bam, in business. I start taking the wheel off and, if you can believe it, I broke his tire iron. It was one of those collapsible ones and I wasn't careful and I snapped the head I needed clean off. Fuck. No worries, he runs to the van, gives it to his wife, and she is gone in a flash, down the road to buy a tire iron. She is back in 15 minutes, we finished the job with a little sweat and cussing, stupid log was starting to give, and I am a very happy man. We are both filthy and sweaty. The wife produces a large water jug for us to wash our hands in. I tried to put a 20 in the man's hand, but he wouldn't take it, so I instead gave it to his wife as quietly as I could. I thanked them up one side and down the other. I asked the little girl where they lived, thinking maybe I could send them a gift for being so awesome. She says they live in Mexico. They are here so mommy and daddy can pick peaches for the next few weeks. After that they are going to pick cherries, then go back home. She asks if I have had lunch, and when I told her no, she gave me a tamale from their cooler, the best fucking tamale I have ever had. So, to clarify, a family that is undoubtedly poorer than you, me, and just about everyone else on that stretch of road, working on a seasonal basis where time is money, took an hour or two out of their day to help some strange dude on the side of the road when people in tow trucks were just passing me by. Wow. But we aren't done yet. I thank them again and walk back to my car and open the foil on the tamale cause I am starving at this point, and what do I find inside? My fucking $20 bill. I whirl around and run up to the van, and the guy rolls his window down. He sees the $20 in my hand and just shaking his head no, like he won't take it. All I can think to say is, poor favor, poor favor, poor favor, with my hands out. Dude just smiles, shakes his head and, with what looked like great concentration, tried his hardest to speak to me in English. Today you. Tomorrow me. Rolled up his window, drove away, his daughter waving to me in the rear view. I sat in my car eating the best fucking tamale of all time, and I just cried. Like a little girl. It has been a rough year and nothing has broke my way. This was so out of left field I just couldn't deal. In the 5 months since I have changed a couple of tires, given a few rides to gas stations and, once, went 50 miles out of my way to get a girl to an airport. I won't accept money. Every time I tell them the same thing when we are through. Today you. Tomorrow me. TLDR, long rambling story about how the kindness of strangers, particularly folks from south of the border, forced me to be more helpful on the road and in life in general. I am sure it won't be as meaningful to anyone else, but it was seriously the highlight of my 2010.
So, that's the story of how a simple act of kindness restored my faith in people and inspired me to do the same for others. It's funny how life works sometimes, how one small gesture can ripple outwards, changing not only the person receiving it but the one giving it, too. I've carried the words "today you, tomorrow me" with me ever since, using them as a quiet reminder to pay it forward whenever I can. Because at the end of the day, we're all just travelers on this road of life, trying to make it through. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one choice, to make the journey a little easier for someone else. Thanks for sticking with me through this. I hope it's a story that makes you think, maybe even act, the next time you see someone who could use a hand. Have you ever got an experience that changed you for the better? Share it with us in the comments. There are moments in life where brilliance and laziness intersect so perfectly that you can't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of it all. This story is one of those moments, a tale of a man whose disdain for the morning sun was matched only by his resourcefulness. It starts on a U.S. military ship during breakfast in the wardroom, where the operations officer, decidedly not a morning person, demonstrates a level of ingenuity that has been etched into my memory ever since. Let me set the scene for you. This is the famous Reddit story known as the Lazy Zombie Operations Officer.
I was once on a U.S. military ship, having breakfast in the wardroom officer's lounge, when the operations officer, OPS, walks in. This guy was the definition of not a morning person. He's still half asleep, bleary-eyed, basically a zombie with a bagel. He sits down across from me to eat his bagel and is just barely conscious. My back is to the outboard side of the ship, and the morning sun is blazing in one of the portholes, putting a big bright-ass circle of light right on his barely conscious face. He's squinting and chewing and basically just remembering how to be alive for today. It's painful to watch. But then zombie OPS stops chewing, slowly picks up the phone, and dials the bridge. In his well-known "I'm still totally asleep" voice, he says, "Hey, it's OPS. Could you shift our bar pat? Yeah, 165. Thanks." And puts the phone down. And then he just sits there squinting, waiting. And then, ever so slowly, I realize that that big blazing spot of sun has begun to slide off the zombie's face and onto the wall behind him. After a moment, it clears his face and he blinks slowly a few times, and the brilliant beauty of what I've just witnessed begins to overwhelm me. By ordering the bridge to adjust the ship's back and forth patrol by about 15 degrees, he's changed our course just enough to reposition the sun off of his face. He's literally just redirected thousands of tons of steel and hundreds of people so that he could get the sun out of his eyes while he eats his bagel. I am in awe. He slowly picks up his bagel, and for a moment I'm terrified at the thought that his own genius may escape him, that he may never appreciate the epic brilliance of his laziness, since he's not going to wake up for another hour. But between his next bites he pauses, looks at me, and gives me the faintest, sly grin before returning to gnaw slowly on his zombie bagel.
Some stories stick with you because of their sheer absurdity, and this one is a masterclass in effortless genius. The operations officer didn't just reposition the ship, he gave all of us in that room a lifelong reminder that laziness, when paired with ingenuity, can be an art form. To this day, I can't look at a bagel or a beam of sunlight without smiling at the memory of a man who steered an entire vessel just to enjoy his breakfast in peace. A lesson in priorities, indeed. Share with us your laziest stories. There are moments in life when the world feels heavy, and it's easy to look away from someone else's struggle. But sometimes, those small, unplanned interactions can ripple out in ways we never anticipate. This story takes me back to a cold day in Vancouver, a quiet cafe, and a chance encounter that changed more than just one life. It's about a split-second decision to step outside of my routine and how, in doing so, I stumbled into a moment that would stick with me forever. This is the famous Reddit story, Mom in the Snow.
I was day tripping to Vancouver from Seattle and stopped in for lunch at a little cafe. From my window, I saw a young teenage girl out in the cold, squatted down in a closed-up business's doorway, holding a small bundle in her arms. She was panhandling. People were mostly walking by, ignoring her. She looked just broken. I finished up my meal and went outside, went through my wallet and thought I'd give her $5 for some food. I got up to her and she was sobbing. She looked like she was 14 to 15. And that bundle in her arms was a baby wrapped up. I felt like I just got punched in the chest. She looked up, putting on a game face, and asked for any change. I asked her if she's like some lunch. Right next door was a small Quick Trip type grocery store. I got a can of formula for the baby, very young, maybe 2 to 3 months old, and took her back to the cafe though I'd just eaten. She was very thankful, got a burger and just inhaled it. Got her some pie and ice cream. She opened up and we talked. She was 15, got pregnant, parents were angry and she was fighting with them. She ran away. She's been gone almost 1 full year. I asked her if she's like to go home and she got silent. I coaxed her, she said her parents wouldn't want her back. I coaxed further, she admitted she stole $5,000 in cash from her dad. Turns out $5,000 doesn't last long at all and the streets are tough on a 15-year-old. Very tough. She did want to go back, but she was afraid no one wanted her back after what she did. We talked more. I wanted her to use my phone to call home, but she wouldn't. I told her I'd call and see if her folks wanted to talk to her. She hesitated and gave bad excuses, but eventually agreed. She dialed the number and I took the phone. Her mom picked up and I said hello. Awkwardly introduced myself and said her daughter would like to speak to her. Silence, and I heard crying. Gave the phone to the girl and she was just quiet listening to her mom cry, and then said hello. And she cried. They talked, she gave the phone back to me, I talked to her mom some more. I drove her down to the bus station and bought her a bus ticket home. Gave her $100 cash for incidentals, and some formula, diapers, wipes, snacks for the road. Got to the bus, and she just cried saying thank you over and over. I gave her a kiss on the forehead and a hug, kissed her baby, and she got on the bus. I get a Christmas card every year from her. She's 21 now and in college. Her name is Makayla and her baby was Joe. I've never really told anyone about this. I just feel good knowing I did something good in this world. Maybe it'll make up for the things I've effed up.
Sometimes, life gives us these quiet opportunities to be someone's turning point, even if only for a brief moment. That day, I might have helped Makayla find her way back home, but the truth is, she left an impact on me that's lasted far longer. Each Christmas, when her card arrives, I'm reminded that it doesn't take much to show kindness or offer a helping hand, it just takes the choice to do it. And maybe, just maybe, the smallest actions can make the biggest difference. Share with us a story that changed your life. There are moments in life when your confidence outpaces your judgment, and boy, last night was one of those moments. It started innocently enough, a dinner invitation from my wife's boss, a pivotal opportunity for her brand new job. My wife, naturally, reminded me to be on my best behavior and to make a good impression. But me? I scoffed, brushed off her warnings, and assured her that making good impressions was basically my superpower. Little did I know, fate had other plans, and those plans involved a steak, an impeccably clean window, and a catastrophic miscalculation that may haunt me and my wife forever. Let me tell you how it all went horribly, hilariously wrong. This is a story from two perspectives, the husband and the wife. It is a Reddit story known as the steak story.
Last night, my wife's boss from her brand new job invited us over for dinner. On the drive over, my wife reiterated many times to me just how important it was to make a good impression. I scoffed and arrogantly informed my silly wife that I always make good impressions. My wife's boss is a single lady in her 50s, so it was just the three of us. We chit-chat over drinks and salads and seemed to really be hitting it off. She laughed at my well-timed, perfectly appropriate jokes and my wife seemed pleased. Soon she brought out the main course, a nice big juicy steak for each of us. As I began to cut into my steak, I was discouraged to discover how undercooked the steak was. Now, I'd had my fair share of rare steak. I prefer medium, but I can handle rare. This was several minutes on a hot grill short of rare. I probably could have resuscitated the cow had I tried. Instead, I sat there fidgeting with my knife and fork, worrying about how I was going to get away with not eating this steak. Claim veganism? No, I'd already feigned great enthusiasm upon seeing the steak. Just then, our hostess excused herself to the kitchen to take care of some dessert preparations. As I looked across the fancy dining room table at the open window of this third-story apartment, a cartoon light bulb appeared over my head. I knew I had to be decisive, realizing that she could return at any moment. I committed. I grabbed the steak with my hand, gently shook off the juice and executed a perfect throw right through the center of the open window. Here's the big-time fuck you. The window wasn't open. It was the cleanest freaking window you've ever seen in your life. That is, until my mostly raw slab of steak slammed up against it and slowly slid down, leaving a trail of bloody juice in its wake. My wife, whose steak was a nice medium rare and was unaware of my predicament, turned, jaw dropped, and stared at me like I was an alien from another planet. This look then slowly morphed into more of a "there is no place on this planet you can ever hide from me" expression of demonic anger. My wife's boss heard the thud of the steak on window impact and came quickly. She took in the scene, the steak sitting on the windowsill, the blood trail, my empty plate, and then gave me an inquisitive, puzzled look. I just didn't know what to say. It felt like a minute of silence, but was probably 3 or 4 seconds. Finally, the best I could manage was "I'm so sorry. I am such a klutz. I don't know. I was just cutting it. And it slipped, just ask my wife. I really am a klutz, right, honey? No help coming from that direction. I will clean this up. I can't believe this. I am so sorry, etc. etc. Both women continued to stare at me like I had escaped from the loony bin as I smeared the blood around the window with my cloth napkin, dusted off the steak, and continued to mutter my incoherent explanation. I knew no one was buying the story. I knew what I had to do. I sheepishly returned to my seat and proceeded to eat every bite of that disgusting, cold, chewy, bloody, raw steak. I remained pretty quiet the rest of the evening. My wife's only 2 words to me since the incident are "I'm fine." TLDR, tried to sneakily throw my undercooked steak through an open window, only to find out it wasn't open.
My husband told this TIFU from his perspective a couple years ago, and it was a popular post. Someone suggested I should tell it from my perspective. Hope our discomfort brings a little joy to you. This actually took place a couple of years ago. I had just gotten a brand new job that I was really excited about. So I was delighted when my boss, who I had been trying to establish a rapport with, invited me and my husband over to her home for dinner. Well, mostly delighted. My husband is. Well, he's the sweetest, but he has a history of doing really dumb shit. Because of this, I was worried about him coming along. By the time the day of the dinner arrived, I had become so anxious about it that I actually floated the idea by my boss that I wasn't sure if he would be able to make it. She was clearly taken aback and responded, "Oh no. I really hope he can. I have a dinner for 3 all ready to go." Upon seeing her dismay, I assured her that I was sure he would find a way to be there. Well, we made it over to her apartment on time and things actually started out really, really well. It was actually just the 3 of us, which surprised me somewhat but made me a little less concerned about my husband, as crowds really tend to bring out his unpredictability. I had just started to finally relax and was a couple bites into a deliciously cooked steak when things took a horrible, horrible turn. My boss had just stepped into the kitchen to check on dessert when I noticed something odd out of the corner of my eye. It was one of those things where you know something strange is happening in your peripheral, but you're not sure what. You have to look over and focus your gaze to really comprehend it. I look over at my husband and see him holding his steak in his hand, hovering it just an inch or 2 above his plate. Before I had a chance to fully comprehend what I was seeing and verbalize something that might have saved all of us from the coming horror, he threw his steak baseball style across the room straight into the dining room window. It hit the window, making a loud noise, and slowly slid down. Now my husband does dumb shit, I already told you that. But he's not a crazy person. Usually when he does dumb shit I at least understand what he's thinking. There's usually some semblance of rhyme or reason to the dumb shit. In this case I was just dumbfounded. I couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't wrap my head around what was going on. I stared at him with what must have been the most confused look, and watched as he stared back at me, an expression of utter horror painted across his face. I couldn't make any sense of what was happening, but I also didn't have time to try. I heard the footsteps of my boss, coming to see what the sound was. It suddenly sunk in that it didn't matter why he did what he did. He did it and we were all about to come face to face with a very awkward situation. I could feel the anger flush through my face. For a brief moment I contemplated trying to help my husband get out of this. But no. This was his dumb shit bed and he could lie in it. Not like there was any possible recovery anyway. My boss walks in and sees the steak lying on the windowsill. There's the fucking longest, most awkward pause where we all just sit there frozen. My boss and I are staring at my husband, forcing the ball into his court, as the cringe just hangs in the air like an ocean fog. He finally manages to mutter some incoherent garbage about being a klutz and even tries to get me to back him up. I leave his ass out to dry in the deafening silence. He makes a poor attempt at cleaning the window and retrieves his steak. Mercifully, my boss asks me a question about work and we both dive eagerly into conversation. We all resume the rest of the evening pretending that he isn't there, a sort of unspoken agreement by all that this is the only way to move forward. As soon as we got to the car, my husband turned into a nervous chatterbox trying to explain himself. Turns out the dumbass didn't like the way his steak was cooked, rare, and get this, he thought the window was open.
My husband, ladies and gentlemen, tried to chuck his steak out a 3-story window. He thought that was a reasonable solution to being served an undercooked steak. A year or so later, my boss hosted a Christmas party for the company at her newly built home. My best friend, Jenny, was my +1. TLDR, took my husband to dinner at my boss' house. He thought his steak was undercooked, thought the window was open, and thought throwing his steak through the window was a reasonable idea.
So, there you have it, one evening, one raw steak, and one monumental lapse in judgment that I'll probably never live down. I've learned 2 critical lessons from this ordeal. Never underestimate the transparency of a clean window. Always listen when your spouse tells you to behave yourself. While my wife is still giving me the silent treatment, I'm cautiously optimistic that someday we'll laugh about this. For now, though, I'm left to replay the scene in my mind, wondering how I'll ever show my face around her boss again. At least I can say one thing with certainty, that steak may have been undercooked, but my humiliation was well done.